Hey, what's up everybody? My name's Onepeg. So in this video, our Lord and Savior from Korea, SDF, ended up doing an impromptu Q&A in the Dev Q&A channel on the Dark and Darker Discord. For those of you that want to go read it, by all means. But for those of you looking for a TLDR, this is basically the main idea. There's going to be some major changes coming to the 3-layer dungeon system that goes from Ruins down through Inferno. There's going to be some major changes coming for all classes, it looks like. Druid mobility is not going to be changed because his intention is to try and buff the other classes to be able to do kind of what Druid can do with countermeasures and whatnot, so that everyone can have some good skill expression like what Druid is capable of doing right now. He gives a brief history on the Rogue and why it feels as awkward as it does right now. He's not a big fan of the kite and chase meta, where people are able to just put their weapon away and run faster than the person chasing them. The problems surrounding Rondel Dagger specifically, and the usage of them as being the current meta. He's looking at giving barbarians bolas, and he wants every class to be able to potentially do 1 versus 3. Okay, so this was a really long Q&A, and we're going to look at kind of like the main idea here. There was an awful lot of questions that got asked when he opened this thread up to everyone to ask a lot of questions, so I would direct you to this thread in the Dev Q&A channel on the official Discord if that's something that you really want to look into. But I want to just give you guys a brief overview. The basic main idea here is that SDF is mainly talking about a lot of balance, a lot of anti-cheat functionality, and a lot of things future-facing. Mainly the idea being that he wants classes to be able to have as much skill expression as druids do, where he even went and said, having serviced this game for over a year, we've thought a lot about the direction in which PvP and classes should go in various directions. In the future, we plan to design this in a way that brings out the strengths of each class a little more. As I've always said, I believe this game should be able to support 1v3, and I'm not satisfied because it's not in that state at the moment. I will tell you my thoughts separately regarding this. And he says that Druid is completely intentional, remain as the characteristic and strength of the Druid. So I actually really like this answer. The idea, not necessarily because Druid is as strong as it is right now, because it is. Let's not make any qualms about that. And he even went so far as to say that he thinks that Bear Druid needs to get adjusted a little bit on its damage dealing capability versus how much damage it can mitigate. And I kind of agree with all the mobility that Druid has. They have very good skill expression. People that know how to play the class end up doing it very well. But I like this answer because he's saying that he wants to buff up all of the other classes to be able to have somewhat similar of an amount of skill expression, to be able to play versus 3 other players and kind of weave in and out of combat and lock people down, or whatever those strengths are for each one of these classes, is something that I look forward to seeing, because I think that is fair. People should have the ability to be able to do some 1v3 stuff. I think that would be really good. There was also a big question about rogues and why rogues ended up being what they are. And SDF went through by saying that basically the class is a relatively low-risk, high-reward class because of all the ratting. They call them crows in Korea, but the Western world, we pretty much refer to them as rats, with them being able to rat and collect stuff off of corpses. You get to go through doors quickly because you have high interaction speed. You open chests fast, you get in, you get out, and you have all of this stealth play and double jump and whatnot. Highly mobile, highly versatile, low death, compared to other classes. Ability. And then you had landmine on top of that. So you had all of this movement and ability to open and close doors and all this rat gameplay, and then you had landmine on top of that, kind of rolling them all up into one. And a lot of people like playing that stuff, obviously, because it was kind of broken. There was some unfair advantage. So he nerfed the class and gave them a bit less attack power. But he says that this is temporary. The idea being that he wants to be able to create more counters for other classes to be able to deal with Rogue when they had more damage. So I think that what he's more or less saying about a lot of these classes is he's trying to buff them up. But he wants to do it in a way that's going to end up being effective for everyone. Going on to say he hopes Rogue will appear in various places in dungeons like the Alien or Spider-Man by climbing walls and in getting in pockets and hiding. Of course, after other classes are given sufficient countermeasures. I also want to see top-tier Rogue players being intelligent in 3v3. Now, regarding Arena, he goes on to say stuff basically to the effect that Arena doesn't end up feeling anywhere close to final. That he wants there to be less mob density because it starts to become obnoxious. It's not fun. There is a minimum level of fun that they believe that they've achieved where people want to play it, and it's pretty rewarding. And there is relatively low risk if you find all of your own gear. It can't be looted, aside from the occasional bug that was occurring, but most of those I think have been hammered out by now. Obviously, leave a comment if that's not the case. But he says that he understands that people feel annoyed by all the monsters. And what he's looking at doing is potentially experimenting with the idea of the monsters that are on the map at the start, but if they die, they stay dead for future rounds. I think that could end up being a potentially good compromise, but we obviously want to play that and see what it's going to feel like, and try different methods and see what ends up ultimately working best for us as a community. He also talked about MMR based matchmaking and the gear pool and rank systems. and says that he's focusing on MMR-based matchmaking in the rank system for now, but his concern is whether they should separate pre-made teams and random match-made teams for more accurate MMR. We all know that it's good to separate them, but we also all know that it's no good to have a split matchmaking pool, meaning that there just aren't enough players to go around right now. Hopefully, again, they're able to generate a quality product that makes more and more people want to play it, and then we don't have to worry about it quite as much. So then there was a question about the movement meta, meaning the kiting meta, and he says he has a big concern about it. In particular, chasing enemies with bare hands and then watching them get further and further away as soon as you pull out your weapon is not a good experience. I completely agree with that take. He also says that, as an idea, I guess, it might be better for everyone to have a very fast movement speed, or it could be better to have fixed movement speeds for each role, like in modern class-based games. So I kind of like this idea too. Maybe if there's some gap closing abilities, more so than what we already have, for people that constantly kite. I'm looking at you, warlocks or rangers. I mean, I'm a warlock too, and I get it, and I can see how it's annoying for people that get countered by it really hard. But if everyone has like some of this give and take, and then it's more about like when you use your skills or how you position yourself, more so than just stat checks, I think that that's always going to be a better option. He says that they plan to experiment with the movement speed meta in the future to determine the direction. He'll share more information when it becomes more clear. Now, he also kind of elaborated on this idea of the gear check system, saying that he went in and said at a different point in time that he actually doesn't like that there is gear-based matchmaking at all. He would rather that the game doesn't have that. But in a game like this one, where there is so much gear disparity and people get gear checked like crazy, even though I would say it's more balanced now than it ever has been, the gear disparity in the game is still obviously going to be a big thing. So he says, to explain more, the game is so risky that when a low-skill player plays with a high-skilled player, the game results in a bad outcome. Both types of players become stressed, making it difficult for the low-skill player to stay in the game due to guilt, and making the high-skill player reluctant to play with the low-skill player. I kind of agree with that. Many team-based games have this problem, but I think each game has its own unique solution. I'm trying to solve this problem in two ways: increasing survival rates of low-skill players and making it possible for high-skill players to 1v3. Now, I kind of dig that. Kind of dig that idea. It gives people the ability to kind of like train themselves up, and it levels the playing field a little bit for people that end up in those situations. I dig this. Hopefully they can pull it off. Now, obviously, these are words on a page, and it's something that they're going to have to try and implement, and it could end up taking a very, very long time, maybe years. But hey, we're along for the ride, right? Assuming, of course, that they don't end up getting their butts handed to them in court. Let's hope not. SDF also ended up making mention that they were going to be buffing sub-boss loot, which I thought was cool, mini-boss loot. Okay, now this one is a doozy. So he's looking at modifying how the 3-layer dungeon system works. This is a big one. Basically, right now, we go into the first dungeon, which is Ruins, and then go into the second dungeon, which is Crypts, and then go into the third dungeon, Inferno, and that loop takes like 40 minutes. And it's kind of boring at points in time. SDF is looking at modifying how this gets played, which I find to be very interesting. We understand your discomfort with 3-layer dungeon, and we know that it's currently quite loose. Also, Expressman has not reached the desired state, and improvements are delayed, so it's still uncomfortable. However, we've come to the conclusion that it would be better to improve the fundamental problem rather than spending too much energy on a short-term improvement to the current state, and we're going to develop the system above. Once the above system is developed, each floor will have time flowing at the same time, and players will be able to move down immediately if they choose. This is different from the floor matchmaking system we talked about before, but it could be a precursor to it. So this is interesting. We're going to experiment with a system that will allow you to start playing the Forgotten Castle and move between floors immediately without having to wait. Just poof. That is crazy insane. Because if that means that they give everyone, say, 20 minutes to experience the game, boss rushing now becomes a big, big thing. That could be wild. And I don't know if that's good or bad wild. I don't know. Crazy. SDF also went on to mention that they look at the Expressman being something that isn't really tweaked adequately right now because the last team going in doesn't really get any access to them, but it looks like that's going to be modified somewhat. He also said that they're going to modify ladders because slipping off and hanging on them at the top and whatnot is not fun. It's something that needs to obviously be adjusted and fixed. He's also looking at shifting the PvE versus PvP meta a bit by saying this won't be explicitly there, but he plans to make it easier for players who don't want to PvP to be able to avoid it. So there won't be any like bona fide PvE mode, but he wants to be able to provide a method for like Timmy's noobs to be able to more reliably escape, I guess, or avoid PvP entirely, which I find to be interesting. So I actually asked a question more specifically about Rondel fighters and Rondel bards. and this is what he had to say. The exact problem with Rondel Dagger is that the animation is too fast. In its current state, adjusting the damage of the Rondel would require modifying the item itself or removing the damage stacking through random modifiers, which is not simple. However, I sympathize with the problem, so I will look in it one by one. So hopefully we'll see a shift in the Rondel Dagger meta. I do agree that the attack speed versus the damage output is just too fast. It's likely the highest DPS weapon in the entire game right now. It probably needs to be revisited. And then I asked him about like Warlock meta stuff, and he said Curse Spam and Phantom Eyes seem to be more of a problem with the movement speed gained through bunny hopping than with the skill. Warlock is too fast to be caught, so low risk play is easy, and even if you struggle to keep up, Phantom Eyes provides another easy opportunity. So what he's saying here is that he misunderstood originally when I asked him a couple of Q&As ago about the bunny hopping and whether it was an intended thing or not. They misunderstood that and didn't realize that I meant like subsequent jumps to be able to maintain momentum in order to be able to, like, you know, express skill. Really, it's just a matter of being able to kite people more effectively when you're warming up spells. And what they basically said was the repeated jumping and maintaining momentum is not an intended thing. So they're looking at changing it. I think they're going to remove it. So we'll see how bad that ends up feeling. But if they do that, I think that they're going to have to reduce the penalty for casters while they're doing cast windups and how much move speed reduction that they end up taking for that. Because right now, the bunny hopping is typically the thing that keeps them away from barbs and fighters sprinting at them. And this goes for all casters, not just like Warlock. My last question that I had for them had to do with leaderboards and how the leaderboard is going to be calculated. He said at this time, the leaderboard formula for adventurer rank has definitely changed. We wanted to have players gather at key points rather than playing a game where you kill all the monsters and open all the chests. We also wanted treasures to no longer affect AP. We also plan to completely revamp the adventurer rank system next season. So I would expect a very, very large shakeup when this has gone, or after this has gone live on leaderboard. We're definitely going to be looking at this and doing a lot of experimenting, figuring out exactly how it works. The Wyvern Egg will end up having a craft, which is good. There will be a paladin, but in the distant future. And last but certainly not least, ultimately, there is an idea that we'll be able to have crafts for all weapons so that people can have the ability to experiment with all kinds of different weapons and weapon builds and specialized weapons in the arena. Well, actually, that wasn't the last one. I would say this is the last one. Will more in-depth melee weapons be added, like giving riposta weapons that can block? This has been on hold for a while. I'm going to start thinking more about combat and see if we can make shields more sophisticated, and then take another look at melee combat mechanics. This doesn't necessarily mean adding new features, though. We'll see how it goes. SDF then went on to talk about how they had been on vacation a lot for the last couple of weeks. They wanted to make sure that everyone in the office was given a few days of respite and rest, so that way they didn't end up getting overworked. You know, after all, at the end of the day, they are all human, and giving them some time off so that they can recharge and do better quality work as opposed to just showing up in the office and constantly being under crunch hours makes sense. You know, you want to treat people that work for you as well as you possibly can. So we ended up saying they only worked about 7 days in the last 3 weeks or so, giving people a much needed vacation and break. Now, obviously, in the midst of that, there was some court battle stuff, and they had to appear for the trial and whatnot surrounding the IP stuff that's going on between them and Nexon, of which we will end up having an answer on the 24th of October, according to the article that we read before. Of course, in the midst of all of that was also conventions. They had TwitchCon, they had Gamescom, and then they had the Tokyo Game Show, and now finally they're all back home. Saying that since the early access service started, we felt that the bug occurrence rate has increased and the level of completion is gradually decreasing. There are many reasons, but ultimately this is due to the accumulated technical debt from the rapid development in the past and the exhaustion from too frequent patches and excessive schedules. In particular, our team members have a strong love for the game and the players and a strong sense of responsibility, so they tend to try and solve it somehow without sleeping for dozens of hours. They've become too accustomed to working without hesitation, even on holidays. And I would argue that SDF is probably the largest culprit of this. The guy stays awake for like 30 plus hours at a clip trying to get things pushed through. And obviously we end up seeing a lot of bugs on the back end, and then there's all the memes about how things don't work and there's another dupe bug and blah, 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 blah. So I'm actually glad that they were able to take a little bit of time off and recharge and work some like normal person hours for a change. I'm always a bigger believer in quality over quantity any day of the week. But anyway, it seems as though they have their head on their shoulders at the very least. I think SDF and the dev team are a good dev team. I think that they're working for us and trying to get us some things that we actually want to see. It seems as though they have a lot of things that are in the cooker here right now, trying to see if we can get something good out of it on the back end. But obviously I will be here reporting on all of that, doing all the stuff, testing it, putting everything through its paces, and letting you guys know what I think. So for those of you that find this kind of stuff interesting, maybe consider subbing the channel. That would be pretty awesome. Otherwise, you can catch me over live on twitch.tv/Onepeg, where I will be live running it back in Dark and Darker starting around 6 or 7 a.m. Eastern Standard Time just about every single day. Otherwise, I will be sure to update you guys with what comes along and all things related to Dark and Darker and other extreme extraction games around the community here, like Legacy, Steel and Sorcery, that's coming out tomorrow for a weekend playtest. I'll be live testing that out for you all around noon Eastern. As always, thank you guys so much for lending me your eyeballs, and I will see you in the next one. Peace.